Hello and welcome to The Blueprint, a Chelsea FC tactics podcast. Sun and I are analysts on X, where we share tactical breakdowns of Chelsea matches and discuss other interesting talking points. In this podcast, we'll be doing the same, diving even deeper into the details. But today, unfortunately, Sun couldn't make it, so the first name that came to our mind to join as a guest. Well, I say a guest, but he's more of a friend than a guest at this point because both of us have known each other for quite a few months now, and he's similarly a tactical analyst, a Chelsea tactical analyst on X. We've connected before. We've also joined on Spaces before as well. I'm pretty sure everyone knows who I'm talking about. It's Jeff. So how are you doing, Jeff?
Yeah, I'm doing well, Fahd. I hope you're doing well as well.
Yeah, doing great. We've been keeping up with your work, Sin, and I've been keeping up with your work ever since I found your account and I came across your account. And I should just start by saying that I really appreciate the work you do. I think the tactical analysis threads you put out, or even the scouting reports you put out, I read your thread on Matthias Amugu, Chelsea's latest acquisition, and I thought it was brilliant. I thought you really comprehensively and I analyzed the player, and it, not all of us have time to really get through the details, but we appreciate everything that you do really. So thank you.
Yeah, I mean, thank you. Like I came across you guys too, Fahd, soon a while back, and yeah, like it was brilliant. Like I really liked what you guys were doing, and the saying as it goes, if you see people who are doing good things, you get drawn to them, and that's what it is. So yeah, soon, you guys should just keep up what you guys are doing because just like Shun was able to inspire me to stat analysis, I'm sure there are other people out there that the same thing, same result. So yeah, pleasure to be here.
Yeah, great way to start the pod. So let's get right into it. In this episode, we'll be discussing the Brighton game, Chelsea's 2-1 defeat to Brighton, the FA Cup on Saturday night. So let's start with Chelsea's build-up phase and build-up tactics, and consequently Brighton's out of possession tactics with their high press. So I'll start with just explaining what we saw. So we saw Chelsea line up in a 5-1-2-3. That's a lot of numbers. So just to explain a little more, that's Chelsea's back line plus goalkeeper in the first phase or the first line. And then Caicedo held the pivot with Palmer and Dewsbury Hall dropping in the half spaces. So that makes us 5-1-2. And then the three was Sancho and Neto holding the width on either side with Nkunku in the middle. So what we saw Brighton do to press Chelsea was they pressed high and pressed aggressively, pressed cleverly as well. So their setup included a man-to-man structure all over the pitch except for Yankuba Minta, who was playing on the right wing. So he'd initially mark Dewsbury Hall in the half space before jumping to Cucurella, who was the free man, in case the ball was played to him. So the logic behind this is that you initially have a +1 in the defensive line. So this is from Brighton's perspective. You have Baleba covering in the middle, and they're ready to transition to that high press in case that initial line of defense is broken. So it's a clever strategy. We've seen many teams employ this before. We've seen Chelsea do this as well. And so, yeah, it was a clever structure, but obviously there are weaknesses to be exploited. And I mean, that is what we see to the build-up in the first goal as well, where when Brighton transition into their man-to-man press, or even if they get their zonal press wrong, it can leave Chelsea 3v3 on the last line. So that would be Nkunku, Sancho, and Neto going up against Lamptey. I forget who was playing at right back, and Lewis Dunk, who was, sorry, Van Hecke, who was marking Nkunku. So that can leave Brighton open to, let's say, if a pass is played between the lines, we can exploit the high line, or even if Chelsea go directly, right? And that's what we see for the first goal, as in, although the first goal was scored, I mean, it was an own goal. The lead up to that corner from which Cole Palmer scores, you can see that. You can see Tosin playing that line breaking pass to Neto directly. He spins Lamptey and Chelsea are in a 3v2 situation. Arguably, Chelsea could have done better to score from there. But They did, and it eventually leads to a goal again, as I said, from the corner. So it eventually does pay off. But what I want to specifically touch on here, and I'd like to hear your thoughts, is that throughout the game, despite these advantages, despite this tactical advantage that Chelsea did exploit right in the beginning of the half, we didn't see this enough. So I'd like to hear your thoughts on just the initial tactics and an initial tactical setup which Chelsea and Brighton employed. And I'd like to hear your thoughts on why Chelsea didn't exploit that enough through, let's say, short build-up passes.
Yeah, so this game specifically is a game I did not rewatch, so I might not be able to like give you like maybe the specific numbers, but I do know like the general overview of how the game went. So just in general, like from build up, like you mentioned, we played in like the 5-1-2-3. And something I felt we didn't do at all in build up was to actually build up. And like you mentioned, they had a +1 in the defensive line. So that means we always had a free man. And that free man was often Cucurella because, like you mentioned, Kubo was taxed with two players. So it was either Cucurella or Keenan Dewsbury Hall. So that was something I felt we didn't exploit at all because Sanchez was very wary, was very like he did not want to pass the ball to Trev. So whenever the ball came to him, he was always looking to go on the right side, and they were man to man on the right side. So he would always just go long, and he wasn't willing to pass the ball to Trev at all, which I felt like killed our whole left side in terms of like the build up. And obviously, if you kill your left side in the whole build up, it's going to affect the general play throughout the game. So we just kept going long. And then the problem when you go long is Nkunku likes to drop a lot. So if Nkunku is dropping, I mean, theoretically, it helps, right? Because if Nkunku drops, then he should get followed. And if he gets followed, then it leaves more space and behind for us to exploit. But the problem, as you mentioned, because we weren't using the left side, and because if Nkunku dropped, they already had a 1+1 in the defense, they could just follow and still have that 3 versus 2. So because we just didn't build up well enough, and given the profile of players we had, where even if you go long, you wouldn't really trust them to bring the ball down and play it, everything was just disjointed from back to front.
Hmm.
So I felt like this was generally like a big problem throughout the game, and we just couldn't fix it. And this is where someone like Colwell is important, because if you had Colwell there, I felt like maybe Sanchez would trust Colwell more and give him the ball, and that way we could have played through them. But we just didn't have that throughout the game, and that affected how we kept the ball in general.
So do you think, as you were saying that, it just got me thinking about maybe why Sanchez did not look to build up through the left. So do you think that's just maybe because Chalobah, being a right-footed centre back, was playing on the left, and that makes it more difficult to receive the ball and then play to the left back because you need an extra touch? So do you think that's maybe one potential reason, or are there other reasons maybe, I don't know, I just we're not maybe thinking about because I thought this was also an issue during the City game as well. That's one match
Yeah,
that
it
comes to my
was.
mind. Yeah, so
Yeah.
I'm trying to think I'm just trying to think why Sanchez goes long, especially with Maresca being adamant that we build with short passes. I mean, that's what we saw with him at Leicester, right? There's that that quote about Mads Hermansen that he would I forget the exact words, but he basically says he wanted him to play short, and that was a very strict and ruthless demand. But we're not seeing that sort of ruthlessness or maybe just being adamant about it with Sanchez, and I just can't really figure out why that is. I think Chalobah being right-footed makes gives us one reasoning for the Brighton game, but again against City we did see Colwell starting on the left, as in the left center back.
Mm.
So yeah, I'd like to hear if maybe you're thinking about maybe a a solution or not a solution, a reason for why this happens.
Yeah, so just to go back to the Brighton game again, I did feel like Trev, like he wasn't pulling wide enough to receive. If you compared it to like maybe how usually Cole would do, I felt like Trev was maybe like his body position was, or maybe positioning in general was maybe a bit more deeper than maybe wider than you want. And I felt like that kind of made it a bit more easy also for Brighton to just remain like a bit more compact in how they press us. But just apart from that, also, I just felt like there was just a general like lack of willingness to use that left side. But let's also go to the Man City game, like you just mentioned. I felt like in the Man City game, they were going like man to man, right? So, and from what I've seen throughout the season, Maresca is willing to go long if the opponent is going man to man. So if they're going full on man to man and he feels like okay, the space is in behind that, he's willing to go long. But I also feel like this is not concrete. It's just something I feel like. But I don't think he trusts Sanchez enough for us to play through like when teams go fully man to man against us. Because when he was at Leicester, he was willing to take that risk when teams went fully man to man against him. Maybe you could say it's because he had better players compared to the opposition. That's a fair argument. But just in general, yeah, there has been a certain lack of risks in terms of like just trying to play out when teams go full on man to man.
Yeah, I think you raise good points, especially with what you mentioned about Chalobah's positioning, because I'm currently looking at this screenshot that I took of when Sanchez went long, and I'm looking at Chalobah's positioning there, and I think you're absolutely spot on with that observation because he is really, really close to Sanchez, and this is something which we actually saw Brighton do well in that when Chelsea pressed high. Especially as the first half went on, you could see Lewis Dunk really pushing to the left flank. He was basically positioning himself as a left back, where
Mhm.
you could see Brighton doing that, right? So you could see Brighton also had a fairly similar build-up shape to that of Chelsea. Not exactly the same. It was again like a 5-2-4 or a 4-2-4 if you don't include the keeper. But yeah, this is what we saw Brighton do to break Chelsea's press, where even Chelsea tried to press with a -1, again, in a slightly different orientation, though. Again, we've seen Chelsea employ this before, where what they do is they have the striker usually Jackson, but against Brighton, that was Nkunku. He pressed the left centre back, then curve his run to press the goalkeeper, so that would cut off one player whilst pressing the keeper. So this would then make the left centre back free. So Chelsea's other frontline presser, which is again usually Cole Palmer, he'd press on to the opposition's left centre back, and then the right winger, Chelsea's right winger, would press on the opponent's left back. So that would make it -1 because Chelsea would be overloaded in the midfield. But that's okay because of the shadow covering, right? Where Palmer's or the angle of Palmer's run cuts off the pass to the free DM. But the issue was twofold. Number one, as I mentioned before, Lewis Dunk pulled out really wide, so this increased the distance for Cole Palmer to track or press rather. So that gave Dunk more time to make the pass to maybe let's say the left back or to the DM. That was one issue. The second issue was an internal issue in that I thought Palmer and Nkunku, but especially Palmer because he was the one supposed to um, press the opposition left center back. Was I thought his timing was off, intensity was off, and sometimes he just wasn't switched on. So that would allow Brighton to just seamlessly play through Chelsea, play through them in the middle. And okay, you could have a fair argument that tactically Palmer was in a weak position, right? Because with Dunk pulling out wide, it was a harder task for him. But I noticed really all in the first half, like in the first 5 or 10 minutes, when Chelsea tried to press Brighton when they were narrow, as in when their centre backs were narrow, they were still able to find the free DM. And this has been a broader issue throughout the season as well. It's
Mm.
something I explored in a thread a few months back about why Chelsea's frontline press needs to improve. So I'd like to hear your thoughts about this topic and why, or maybe just what areas and how can Chelsea improve with their frontline press.
Yeah, so in regards to this game specifically, I do think our approach in general was maybe a bit more conservative, whereas we only went man to man if we managed to pull Brighton to one side of the field, so like maybe to a wide area, then we went man to man. But in general, I don't think we did that enough, and like you touched on some of those points really well, and I think it's got to do with Nkunku and Palmer, and even Sancho to a certain degree. And one thing I found with our team throughout the season is with Palmer, he's inconsistent. There are certain games he does it really well, certain games, he doesn't do it well. But even when he does it well, there are still times where he easily loses concentration and allows his marker, which most often is the DM, to easily receive. And we know how dangerous that can be, right? If you're letting the opposition's DM receive the ball freely, you're easily allowing them to have the ball and progress the ball, which is never good. But in this game specifically, I felt like whenever Nkunku did something well, like cover the opposition shadow, make the right run, try to block the passing lanes, it felt like Palmer wasn't doing something right. And then whenever Palmer did something right, it felt like Nkunku wasn't up to be doing something right. So it always felt like there was a disconnect between how we were pressing. And I felt like it was more so like a player issue. And one big problem I also had with Sancho in general was that Sancho would make the run, but he wouldn't actually try to win the ball. So
Mhm.
it was like he was making himself available, like showing that, hey, he's doing what he's supposed to do, but he's not actually putting in the intensity to actually stick his foot in and win the ball. And because of that, I felt like whenever it got to that moment where he had to press with that extra bit and he didn't do that, Brighton could also easily just play out. So it it's just been like a lot of like compounding problems.
Mhm.
And
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, I think, and see, we all love Cole Palmer, right? I don't think there's a single Chelsea
yeah.
fan that that wouldn't love Palmer. He's one of the best players in the Premier League, one of the best players in Europe. But that still does not, especially in the modern tactical environment, give
Mhm.
him any excuse to have a weak side of his game in terms of out of possession, the out of possession side of his game. Because the example that comes to my mind, one of, again, my favorite players in the Premier League is Martin Odegaard. And what I love about Odegaard is that he's just a complete attacking midfielder in that he's got all the on-ball qualities and he's the one leading Arsenal's press because he's so good at it. His work rate's amazing. The intelligence with which he also times his press, everything, just everything about his defensive game is just so spot on, and that's the reason Arsenal does not have a weak point in their out of possession structure, right? Is because all 11 of their players are on it every single game, or at least almost every single game, where their responsibilities are carried out to a very high standard, and their execution is also really good. Their intensity is also really good. So this is something, again, a broader issue for Chelsea. And I'm not singling out Cole Palmer here. There are many other players in the team who needs to improve on this, but I'm just specifically touching on the frontline press for now, because I thought that it was especially relevant in the Brighton game. And so yeah,
And yeah,
Chelsea's
just
in,
just to
yeah,
catch you up a little bit, yeah, the thing is your defense starts from the front. So the moment the
absolutely.
front isn't doing what they should do, it's 100% going to affect the midfield and the back line. And
Hmm.
then you also have to consider the players we have in our midfield. So if you consider that the players we have in our midfield aren't being protected in the front because you have Caicedo and Enzo, and Well, this game specifically, you have KDH and Caicedo, then that's a setup for disaster because
Yeah.
those two players. Well, Caicedo is a ball winning machine, but the other player needs protection. So if the front line can give the other player that, then Caicedo cannot do everything by himself. So
Yeah. Yeah, completely agree with you there. I think that's a brilliant way of framing it as well, where if your front line press breaks, then the rest of the team are just struggling. The second and third line of defense are just struggling to cope with the space that's been left behind and just all the positional disadvantages they'd be in. And so yeah, this allowed Brighton to build up just easily. I never thought Chelsea put them under any pressure, apart from
no,
one or two moments. Even if that. Brighton just control the game that way, right? Like where you're not able to disrupt them in any phase. And this is something we saw in the middle third as well. I don't mind Chelsea defending passively and defending zonally. You can do this to a very high standard. Look at Aston Villa's mid block, for example. Look at Arsenal's mid block, for example. It is possible that especially Aston Villa, because they're so passive in the middle third, it is doable, but it still requires players to be switched on defensively all the time. And Chelsea just aren't there yet. And in the first half, something that we saw a lot was Brighton using those positional rotations to pull apart Chelsea, which, funny enough, is something Brighton did really well, I thought, which Chelsea didn't do. And these are both topics I really want to discuss hand in hand, where Chelsea barely created enough chances.
mm,
Like it was, I don't remember the numbers, but it was really awful. Whereas Brighton, they didn't create, let's say, too many chances, but they were still in control. Like when they were in possession, it did feel like at least they were going to create something. So I'd like your thoughts on both, really, on Chelsea's staticness in possession and how that really cost Chelsea the game in a way, or partly cost Chelsea the game, and what Brighton did with their in possession work, with their movements as well.
yeah. So as far as we go, Chelsea go, I felt like the game plan for Maresca was actually pretty good because it was like a 4-on-5 build up that turned into like a 2-3-5 in possession. So we had like you had like Gusto playing as the wide CM, and then you also had Cucurella playing as the wide CM. So you could easily see what Maresca actually wanted to do. He wanted to have those five attacking lines: the Nkunku, Palmer, KDH, Sancho, Madueke, and then have Gusto and Cucurella be able to make runs, whether underlaps or overlaps, to pull apart their backline or their midfield. And I felt like that was a good game plan, especially for the way Brighton defended, where that they were really like man to man, very aggressive on certain players. So I felt like it was very easy for us to just make those movements. If you made the right movement, it would have been very easy to just pick apart this Brighton team because their out of possession shape was I thought was bad. But here comes the problem. So starting from the front line, Nkunku would drop, and then you would still have Palmer also dropping. And then sometimes you would also have KDH dropping or just staying still. So the problem was when Nkunku dropped, we weren't making the right movement. It was too static. And I felt like as a team, even though Nkunku as the false nine isn't like the best option against this Brighton team, I did still feel like we could have, in terms of general movement, our movement could have been a whole lot better to just take advantage of like what Nkunku was doing. Like just play to his team. If he moves here, move there. If he moves there, moves there. But we just weren't doing that. We're just too static. It felt like this team didn't know how to play with a false nine.
Hmm.
So I felt like that was like a big problem. And then also the few times Gusto overlapped or underlapped, we were able to create some really good situations where Gusto was often too static. And I genuinely don't believe that that's the plan or that's the goal Maresca wanted them to execute.
Mm.
because every time we've seen this similar setup where he puts those two fullbacks in those wide positions, it's because he wants them to make those underlaps or overlaps. And we saw Cucurella do that. But yeah, so in general, I just felt like our movement was too static. We weren't trying to take advantage of the spaces that we should have. And because of that, we just didn't create enough. And Palmer especially disappointed me in terms of like running in behind because I expected him to make much more runs when Nkunku dropped because when Nkunku dropped, he was followed and that space was there. But Palmer was often he was also trying to drop rather than running behind. So nothing came from there. And when
Mhm.
KDH made those runs, when he was found, he just doesn't have the ability to shake off that defender and just make something happen. So there's that. And our wingers, Sancho doesn't make any run, any diagonal runs. He's just there. So and Neto made some runs, and eventually he also became too static. So, but yeah, in terms of that, I felt like that was our problem. But in terms of Brighton's in possession plan, that's where you at, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So in terms of Brighton's in possession plan, yeah, I thought they had a good plan. And we gave them control because, like we mentioned earlier, the out of possession plan was be conservative in the initial high press and then try to transition into like a mid block and then try to apply pressure there, win the ball, and then counter attack right there. But uh Brighton took advantage of the fact that our two pivot strikers, they weren't pressing hard enough, they weren't pressing well enough, and we easily allowed them to circulate the ball around that area of the field. And they were just trying to get us in behind, trying to see if they could also access those, central spaces. They had like a lot of rotations, especially wide rotations, um, that they used very well. That they used very well. But in general, I never really felt threatened whenever they had the ball in possession, despite our poor mid block. Um, but whenever they did have the ball in those half space zones or crossing zones where they could cross the ball, I always felt like Chelsea didn't have enough cover in the last line. And I always saw them have certain overloads in the at the far post. So that was always something that was like an icky feeling whenever I was watching the game, which I think they didn't take enough advantage of. If they did, they could have punished us more in that regard. So yeah.
Yeah, just a few points that I want to touch on. I thought firstly you excellently explained pretty much everything, but I'm glad that you touched on Maresca's initial game plan because I thought that I actually liked the initial setup with Cucurella and Gusto playing a little higher than the center backs, but not exactly as the number eights, because I liked it for two reasons. Number one, it gave Chelsea a better rest defense structure where Chelsea were in a better position to counter press if there was a turnover and cope with defensive transitions where the wide areas were better protected. Because if you're in a 3v2, yes, it gives you better protection in midfield, but considering Brighton's wide threat, I thought it made complete sense to use that bit of 2-3-5 or 4-1 rest defense structure. So yeah, I think props to Maresca there for setting the team up really well in terms of an in possession standpoint and a rest defense standpoint. But as you mentioned, we just didn't see enough movement from the team, especially with Nkunku dropping, as you said. I think you covered everything there. With Chelsea out of possession, I've got nothing to add from a mid block perspective. But for those wondering why Chelsea did not press man to man, the reason is because you could see the troubles Brighton caused us when we were playing conservative, quote unquote conservative, because Chelsea didn't really carry that conservative approach really well either. But you could see how Brighton could pull apart Chelsea when we still had a man advantage, let's say in midfield or in the defensive line. So if you go man to man against them, I think Maresca just doesn't trust the players to be completely switched on to defend man to man because for that you require another level of intensity and concentration. So I think that's why we didn't see anything man-to-man related in Brighton's defensive third or in the middle third. So yeah, I think that covers it all. I'd want to know if you want to add anything else. Otherwise, I'll just want to conclude on the game and then, well, the next game we play Brighton again at the Amex Stadium again. So yeah, do you have any closing thoughts on the game?
Yeah, so just in general, something I'll add for the imposition style is that Maresca wanted to control the ball. Like Maresca understood that this was a game that we can only win it by controlling the ball. So I do think he could have let them know to maybe not rush play, but at the same time, I felt like maybe they took it too literal because you could tell, like you just mentioned, like you just made an excellent point about the 2-3 giving you a good rest defense. And when you play with a 2-3, what it means is that you want to be aggressive in the rest defense. You want to win the ball back immediately as you lose it, right? And then keep the ball. So just from that, plus the other reasons we mentioned, plus the way we're trying to keep the ball, you could tell Mariska wanted to keep the ball and play that way because he knew that having the attackers we did in the first person line, plus the pivot we did of Caicedo and KDH, he knew that you don't want that team to be present all the time. So that's also just something I want people to know.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point as well. Yeah, and just overall to conclude on the game, I thought Chelsea just didn't create anything, just barely anything in possession and out of possession. We looked weak because we could
Yeah.
not press against Brighton's build-up. They just had complete control, and the onus was just on them to create and convert those chances. You could say Chelsea were a bit unlucky with the Lamptey handball before Mitoma gets the second, but I honestly thought it was a game for Brighton to lose because they were just the better side on the night. And well, interestingly enough, we faced them on Friday night. Again, as I said, it'll be an away fixture. So, do you have any thoughts on what Maresca could change?
Um, to be honest, I'm also looking at the players who are going to be there rather than Maresca, because I think sometimes people put too much stock in how much a manager can do. Because, like we just discussed, a lot of our issues had to do with players, player issues, right? Nkunku not person, this not making this run, this and that. So if you have Jackson, if you have Cole, Enzo will be starting the game from the start. So Cole can help our build up. Enzo can make those passes. And the players know that Enzo can make those passes. So maybe they'll be more willing to run in behind. And then there'll also be Jackson. Jackson can drop. Jackson can run in behind. Just Jackson can occupy two defenders. That will open more spaces in the half spaces from the width. And our wingers can exploit that better. So if we can have those three players starting, Jackson, Enzo, Colwell, I think would be a whole lot better. And even Jorgensen, really, Jorgensen is a better ball playing keeper than Sanchez. So if we had Jorgensen starting, our build up and our whole game can be a whole lot better, and our person can be a whole lot better. So that's really what I'm hoping for, rather than any tactical changes.
Yeah, I think the personnel will definitely make it will change the game or impact the game. But I would still expect Maresca to make a few changes, especially with his high pressing approach. I think we're going to
Hmm.
see the wingers try to press the center backs with them curving the run more. That's my prediction for the Brighton game. I think that's the tweak he'd make from an out of possession standpoint with the high press. And in possession, I think we might see a change back to a 3-1-6 or a 3-2-5, but I don't think that would matter that much because at the end of the day, if you don't have movement, your structure just does not matter. So I
Hmm.
wouldn't mind if Maresca stuck with the same in possession plan as well. But yeah, let's see. It'll be an interesting game for sure. I think it's always a fascinating encounter when two teams play each other back to back. within the span of just a few days. It's always
Yeah.
interesting and fascinating to see how managers think, like what will Hustler do to change his team? What will Maresca do to change his team? And yeah, it should be a fun watch. Hopefully, Chelsea get the win, especially with the top four race getting really, really tight. Chelsea have barely any room for error. And yeah, with that, I'd like to conclude the episode. I thought you were excellent today. I thought you spoke really well. You touched on many important points. So I'd like to hear your closing thoughts if you've got anything else to add.
No, I just wanted to say thank you. Thank you for inviting me. This was my first time doing anything like this, so it was a bit nerve-wracking. So hopefully I can do much better next time. But thank you all for having me. And yeah, this is a really fun pod. So I'm happy to be here.
I'm surprised this is your first time because I thought you didn't sound nervous at all. I thought you were excellent. You conveyed your points really, really well. And hopefully, this is just the first of many where we collaborate with you because, I mean, I always love reading your work. I said this in the at the start of the pod as well. I think you put a lot of thought into everything you say, and it's been a fun chat. I really enjoyed this conversation. And yeah, thank you for being here. And as I said, hopefully this will just be first of the many appearances you do with us.
Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, thank you, Jeff. Thank you to everyone else listening. I hope you enjoyed this pod, and we will see you again next week. Bye bye.